How many
I'll look for the
Americans
stats.
live in Ukraine? I'm just going to guess there are at least a
I'm
few,
stunned.
right? Who have built lives in Ukraine.
They made a choice.
They didn't make a choice to get invaded, did they?
No. They made a choice to live in somewhere that's not America. Therefore,
And it's
consequences
okay to-
come with choices.
What about students, exchange students?
What about them?
They made a choice, Stardust.
Oh, okay. They made a choice.
Not to
All
get
right.
invaded.
You know
Just
what?
to be clear, they didn't
You're
make a
so
choice to
right.
get
You're
invaded.
you know what? So right.
But-
I Sparky over here is just nailing it on the head. Just amazing. If you're so concerned about the Russian people, which very fair thing to be concerned about. I'm concerned about them too. As soon as they withdraw from Ukraine and it is built into the sanctions, as soon as they withdraw, the sanctions are lifted.
The O0 inner circle of Putin's oligarchy, somehow haven't really fully had their accounts and assets and Western properties fully seized. So, I mean, there is some half measures to some result.
Shut up, Fabio. Okay, I'm done hearing you talk. Okay.
The first topic is Russia and sanctions. Last week we discussed whether we should send aid and weapons to Ukraine. Well, now what about the other end of the spectrum? What about, well, not the other end of the spectrum, but the other side of the coin? What about sanctions on Russia? Do you support sanctioning the Russian Federation for the invasion of Ukraine? We're going to start with Fabian Liberty.
So I'm kind of two minds on this. While I understand the need for sanctions with kind of like the situation that we have and the fact that we are a nation state with a lot of economic power and a bit of a responsibility to do certain things, what I don't seem to like about the way that we're engaging in sanctions is more about the rhetoric around them as opposed to sanctions themselves. I feel that sanctions should be something that is short-termed and tied to a goal that we're looking for, right? A short-term, very strong sanction that says, these sanctions will be lifted once peace talks occur and a treaty is signed and you guys stop doing what you're doing. And instead, what we're doing is we're seeing these sanctions and we're seeing the cathedral of the media and the corporate state kind of use these sanctions as a means of apologizing for COVID restrictions, damage on the economy, Biden's horrendous domestic policy, and the way that he's destroyed the economy and destroyed oil and natural gas with so many of his recent policies, as well as his executive orders from day one. And the thing is that, we've seen what sanctions do in the past, right? When we had sanctions against Russia, against Crimea, we saw that it affected the Russian GDP about 1 to 1.5% loss in GDP. And in countries, with the exception of Latvia, that bordered Russia, we saw 10 to 15% GDP losses. So what these sanctions do when they're long-term and not tied to a goal is directly damage the Ukrainian people as well as other people that are in that region that are trading with them, do very little damage to Russia, and become this kind of smoke and mirrors trick that the West and the EU and the media gets to use to blame bad domestic policy on sanctions. And so I'm for the sanctions, but they really need to be tied to something, and we need to be careful about the way that we punish individual people in other countries and our own citizens with these sanctions.
Sparky?
So I'm almost on track with what Fabian said there. Scott's pretty smart on this one. But I also want to add on to this. Look, I do support the idea of sanctioning. I think that generally doing blanket sanctions across the entire nation is actually not going to really help all that much. In fact, every time we've seen extreme sanctions happen for extended period of times, well, it usually goes wrong. I'm looking at Germany and I'm looking at Japan for prime examples of that. I think the idea of sanctioning Putin and most of their oligarchs immediately would be a better idea than basically isolating them. When you do complete global isolation, all you're going to do is give them nothing else to lose. And we may see some escalations based on that.
Okay, now we're going to throw it over to, let's change it up, throw it over to Loaderbox.
Okay. Yeah, sanctions are really, really rough. I don't really I have any sympathy for people who are watching the ruble crash and celebrating it, and watching like ordinary Russians, many of whom are liberal opponents of Putin, suffering for something that they oppose themselves. Unfortunately, it does seem like one of the only things we can do. I think it's just the problem with them is that they're not. There doesn't seem to be that much cohesion on like what they're trying to achieve. Like Fabian said, there hasn't been like any coordination recently with the EU and US over like, if you stop bombing, we'll lift this chunk of the sanctions. If you stop shooting, if you come out of this region. The ones that are targeted at the oligarchs and their technology, the tech ban I think is very good because it's targeting people who are motivated to keep the war going, and it's also targeting things like it's making them harder to source components for military tech and things like that. Yeah, I really wish that this kind of bandwagon would stop. I don't really know why banning like OnlyFans in Russia is going to help anyone, or like private companies just kind of wanting to keep a good rep by arbitrarily just like stopping business. I think it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, I think it's all we've got, and we're in a very unique position right now where the global economy is big enough that they maybe could have an effect, but definitely needs to be done in a more pointed way.
Okay, I'm going to throw it now over to Sprouticus.
All right, so I think that the sanctions on Russia are a good thing. I think that anything we can do to try and decrease Russia's influence or to decrease Russia's ability to go further into Ukraine is a good thing. So far, we've taken out their oil and gas exportation. We have taken them off of SWIFT, which is a huge part of it, making them go to CIS, and CIS is absolutely not anything near SWIFT. CIS has 76 direct participants, and 75 of them are in China. 1 is in Hong Kong. And so you're going to see a lot. It's going to be a lot harder for Russia to make transactions money-wise. I think that this has been an overwhelmingly good thing. And I think that it should have happened sooner.
I'm not that surprised that Russia is cis. I didn't expect them to be trans. Gonna throw it over to Mythic Politics.
As far as the question whether we approve of the sanctions or what we think about it, I look at this as an extension of the 2014 sanctions. So I think when you look at the longitudinal effects of sanctions, they have less. If they're used as a punctuated strike towards a specific diplomatic means, they seem to be effective. For what they're trying to do with them now, when trying to circumvent an already existing military action, I don't think there's much precedent for that working. And if anything, the severity of these ones, I think, are going to exacerbate existing economical splits between the East and Western blocks, and it's going to specifically, probably paradoxically, foment a relationship in between China and Russia. It's probably the opposite of what the West wants. It's going to give China an opportunity to become cozier with Russia as they find different and novel ways to circumvent sanctions that have been going on a long time.
Okay, I'm going to throw it now over to Tiberius.
Yeah, so I'm going to divide this into two. The first part is that, do I believe in the sanctions? Yes. Overall, is that this actually was what NATO and the American empire, if you want to call it that, was actually built upon. It was to build out to contain and defeat the Soviet Union. We kept it around after the Cold War just in case we decided we wanted to use it again. And it's actually doing what it's supposed to do outside of defending Ukraine. And that was last week's topic, so I won't get there. But the other side of this is that it's weird and ironic when we get to this on the open, in that both Russia and NATO's worst fears were validated in the last couple of months. Russia invaded a sovereign nation, which is exactly what NATO is supposed to do or stop. And on the other side of that is that the Russians are going, hey, NATO literally just economically tried to shut us down, which is exactly what we were afraid of happening. It's kind of weird because we've gone full circle for everybody. I'll get to that in the open. Thank you.
Stardust?
Yeah, I support the sanctions. The sanctions, part of the reason why we have sanctions is to make an already very expensive thing, war, even more expensive. I mean, for example, the top Russian imports for 2020 were machinery, appliances, electronics, chemical products. These are things that are going to be very, very painful for them in the war. And we've already seen them try to go to China, and China has actually turned them down in providing machinery parts to them. So I believe somebody else in this panel said that China, this gives China the opportunity to get close with them. I actually don't think that's the case. We've seen China actually kind of reverse what their public statements are regarding this. And then also it's built into the rules of the sanction that the sanctions go away as soon as Russia leaves Ukraine. So it seems like pretty comprehensive to me. I think they're pretty effective. And initially, yeah, it looked like, oh, what are these really going to do? But we can see that just looking at the markets, looking at the ruble, how much their economy has tanked from these sanctions.
Okay, now we're going to throw it over to Parker.
I definitely agree with the sanctions. I think that they were beneficial for at least getting Russia to do or be able to stop Russia from engaging in any more conflict in that. I do think that we need to take into account how these sanctions are affecting the people, not necessarily just like the overall effect of them. The overall effect has been great, but as like they said previously, I do think that we should make sure that they're targeted to make sure that it's specific to we're getting something out of it, which is also laid out in the sanctions, which I think is beneficial. But I do very much support 100% the sanctions on the Kremlin and oligarchs. I think that they are more beneficial than ones that would affect people, of course.
Okay, so that is all the opening statements. Does anybody want to open this up?
The removal from SWIFT, that could actually be interpreted as an act of war. The more you isolate a country, we've seen this historically. When we isolated Japan and we took them away from being able to purchase lumber and oil, they bombed Pearl Harbor.
Oh,
do you understand that? Do you understand that any sanctions can be interpreted as an act of war?
Yes, but
okay, so sanctions in themselves can be interpreted as an act.
Okay,
what would you like the alternative to be? Would you like us to actually?
Okay, one at a time. Okay, so Sprout asked him a question, so I want to make sure Sparky can respond to that question, and then we'll throw it over to you, Star.
Cutting an entire country off from the world economy when we have really intermingled the entire world with economy, doing that is only going to solidify them in their stance. You think Putin just did this invasion all nimbly bimbly, just woke up one morning and said, you know what, fuck it. I'm feeling a little cute today. I think I'll invade Russia. I'll invade Ukraine. No, he actually thought all this out. He knew sanctions were coming. He fortified himself and all of his little buddies. And look, he doesn't give two shits if the citizens actually do anything because he rules with a freaking iron fist. All it's going to do is completely divide the world. Look, we've already got Brazil. We've got Mexico. We've got all these different countries actually saying, look, we're kind of with Russia on this one. I don't agree with what Russia did. I think our sanctions, the way we had them targeted, we didn't go after the individuals. In fact, have we even sanctioned Putin himself? Because I know we sanctioned a lot of the big oligarchs around him, but for the longest, they didn't even want to touch Putin. If you make it to where the Russian people feel like they have no other alternative, all they're going to do is balkanize, and they are just going to
join this co-siding with Russia.
Wait, 1 second. Quick question: is nimbly blimbly an official Russian military term, or
I don't know. I don't speak commie, so
got it. Okay, I just want to check.
Yeah.
Sprout, you wanted to respond to that, and then we're going to bring it over to Stardust and Tiberius eventually.
So yeah, according to BusinessStandard.com, Mexico declines to join Russia sanctions and seeks to stay on peaceful terms. That is,
they decline to join the sanctions.
Because you seek to stay on peaceful terms does not mean that they side with Russia. It just means that we're going to try and stay neutral with this because the United States initially didn't join World War II, but they weren't. They were just trying to stay neutral, but they weren't in favor of what Nazi Germany was doing. Those are two completely different things, my man.
Putin was sanctioned as well, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. See, I wasn't sure if that happened yet. Thank you.
Stardust?
I am not sure that. I guess my only question would be, what would you prefer if sanctions are interpreted as an act of war? What do you think would be a better thing that would not be interpreted as an act of war?
NMC, not my concern. Look the other way, not our problem.
Look the other way. Okay.
Not our problem.
Okay. All right.
So is America no longer the land of the free?
America is the land of the free, not Ukraine.
So wait, if we take the not my,
Okay.
if we take the not my problem or not my concern take, which whatever you want to do, my man. If we take that take, should we just left our troops in Ukraine? Or because if we take our troops out, then it's becoming our problem because we're deciding
We
to
have
leave
no
Ukraine.
troops in Ukraine.
We did prior to Russia invading.
Yes, we had Green Berets there. Yes, they were training their.
We had
their
more
army.
than Green Berets.
Okay, guy.
I mean, do you want me to go back and look how much troops we had in Ukraine before we moved them to Poland?
Go for it, man. That we didn't have. We didn't
All right,
have
we'll
a
get
military
stats. We'll get
footprint
stats.
there. We were training people over there. We had an agreement to train their people and to arm them. But as soon as Russia moved in, we moved our people out, and that's completely fine. Not our problem.
Let's see.
How many Americans live in Ukraine? I'm just going to guess there are at least a
I'm
few,
stunned.
right? Who have built lives in Ukraine.
They made a choice.
They didn't make a choice to get invaded, did they?
No. They made a choice to live in somewhere that's not America. Therefore,
And it's
consequences
okay to-
come with choices.
What about students, exchange students?
What about them?
They made a choice, Stardust.
Oh, okay. They made a choice.
Not to
All
get
right.
invaded.
You know
Just
what?
to be clear, they didn't
You're
make a
so
choice to
right.
get
You're so.
invaded.
You know what? So right.
But-
I Sparky over here is just nailing it on the head. Just amazing. So.
Sprout, I got about a battalion that was over there all together. I want to,
Okay.
yeah, I want to sidestep a little bit because I do want to hit the primary thesis that Sparky was getting. Is this an act of war or just in the sanctions? In a way, yes. Like we can do the parallels and analogies to World War II, but overall, is that ever since the advent of nuclear weapons, and particularly mutually assured destruction back in the 50s, is that everything's kind of on the table now. We do some intelligence shit on the regular that used to be acts of war that would start wars, but everyone just sweeps it under the rug, throws it under the table. Economically, militarily, like as long as you're not actually having the nuclear powers go at each other face to face in a military confrontation, we have seen diplomatic, economic, and military movements on a level that we haven't, or that we just don't understand since 1945. It's strange, but basically everything's on the table. So is it an act of war? Yes, but in a way, in the theater of geopolitics, this war's been going since 45 with the start of the Cold War, and even though it took a break in the 2000s, it's kind of back.
It's a very quiet panel.
It's
I think we were waiting for a response from Aircraft Sparky, but he's muted. So
Okay. So what response do you want? We don't really have any obligation to do anything for Ukraine. I know that you just came from a really tough business trip. We're not going to call it deployment because we don't deploy inside of our own country.
no, there is such thing as that. But keep going.
Okay. You don't sit there and do things like pick fights with people just because, hey, someone's buying arms from us. Look, I have no problem. If Russia decides to go to war with us tomorrow, cool. We'll fight them and we'll meet them on the battlefield and yada, yada, yada. We'll probably fucking demolish them. We'll take some pretty big casualties in the deal. But why should the U.S. is not the world police. And for some reason, everyone thinks it is. Maybe it's because that's the way we've acted for the past, 40, 50 years. We need to stop doing that. We intervene in way too many things. And look, every time everyone on these panels talk about, oh, we need to intervene. Well, you're talking about soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are going to be doing it. You're not going to be doing it. If you'd like to get off your dumpy ass out of your living room, bedroom, or whatever it is you are at and do it, go fucking do it. Look, join the Reddit army, the they-thems that are going over there. Have fun. But for Christ's sakes, stop trying to push American service members into doing things that are not what they signed up for. They signed up to support and defend the Constitution
we're
of the United
not.
States and defend America.
These are
Aircraft Sparky.
sanctions. These
Yeah,
are
these are
sanctions.
sanctions.
This is not anything to do with American service members. This is literally like economic sanctions. What are you talking about?
Oh, look, you cut them off to a point to where they feel desperate, and you'll see exactly what happened in Germany in 1939. You'll see the
If
exact
you're
same
going to bring up
thing that
Japan
happened
again,
with-
Japan wanted to bomb us
Japan.
before we did that. Japan
Yes, and
wanted
when we took
they were
them-
going to
when
do
we
that
took-
before we even did that.
when we took away their access to oil
It
and lumber,
doesn't matter.
that
They
was just
were
the
going to do
final
that
freaking
anyways.
straw.
That was
Right.
that was not the reason Japan bombed us. Japan bombed us because they wanted to take control of the Pacific. They wanted every single island, and that included Hawaii. What Japan didn't know is that when they bombed Hawaii, that it woke up a sleeping monster. Okay. Hitler was probably not very happy at all when he learned that Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, because he knew what would happen. Japan did not know that was going to happen. They wanted to control the Pacific.
Yeah, they fucked up and found out. In fact, I believe it was Admiral Yamamoto that said, I believe we woke a sleeping giant. Yes.
Yeah, Yamamoto didn't want to,
Yeah.
Japan was essentially forced to attack America at a certain point. He was really didn't want to attack America.
Yeah.
Aircraft Sparky, why do you think countries like Ukraine over the last kind of 6 to 8 years have fought quite hard to be more integrated with economies like America and Europe rather than Russia?
Because they're more expansive, they're more prosperous.
Partly as well because in 1994, the United States signed the Budapest Memorandum, like pledging to uphold Ukrainian democracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
But
do you
that
think
isn't.
it's worth
but-
reciprocating those terms?
So upholding democracy means that we participate in certain things. Doesn't mean that we go and defend them.
We're not,
There's a big difference. If there was a defense treaty, that'd be a different animal. But this
So
is
how-
not the case.
so how do we uphold their democracy since their democracy is not really being upheld right now, right?
What, are we supposed to do everything for them?
I didn't say everything. We're talking about sanctions.
Well, look.
I feel like that's
I-
like the least you can do, isn't it?
So no, we could do much less. Trust me.
Like what? Send them helmets. I'm joking.
No.
Go on.
We could do what the Obama administration did and send them blankets, and that's it. Yeah, we sent blankets and food. That's what we did around 2008. That was a big part of the Ukraine policy of the Democrats, is we weren't going to arm them at all. We started arming them later down the road, and now
In 2008, why did they need? Okay, they weren't being invaded in 2008.
Yes, they were invaded in 2014.
So what would you do, Loner?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, if you're going to uphold the treaty, right? Like that means we have
Well,
to.
it's not even a treaty. It's a
If we want to uphold the agreement, right? Then in order to uphold the agreement, we have to say, well, we've already signed an agreement, so to secure the territorial integrity of Ukraine as well, right? So it would be impossible for us to be a part of any peace negotiation that, let's say, gave the Donbass region its independence and simultaneously uphold that treaty. So if we're invoking that treaty as like a thing that we can't go against, I'm curious if you're doing it just like rhetorically to Aircraft Sparky, or if like you believe that like we have to uphold that treaty perfectly, then that means that like in no way, shape, or form can we negotiate with Russia on any part of independence in the Donbass region, and instead we have to be willing to fight Russia to uphold the territorial integrity of Ukraine as well.
Well, I don't really know why the Donbass. I feel like is maybe not the best example because I don't think there's ever been a majority in Donbass who want to be part of Russia. So.
Yeah, but
like,
you're sidestepping the point, which was why I was just asking about the treaty, right?
Yeah.
Like,
So the point is
territorial
like,
integrity.
within reason, obviously. So you can't put boots on the ground or the no-fly zone because that's like going to be nuclear war. But yeah, you do what you can, and sanctions, as well as I guess sending arms, are kind of two of the things that you can do. I mean, the sanctions have got.
Well, I think
problems
what
with them,
Aircraft
yeah.
Sparky might be somewhat, and I'm not trying to insult you too much, but I'm just being honest, like a little bit ineloquently saying, is that there is economic warfare, and there's a gradual kind of play. Like obviously, boots on the ground is kind of a hard line for a lot of countries and nations, and definitionally maybe for some opinions of the American people or for certain treaties, but there is certainly a gradation of warfare, and I would say that we're likely engaged in a form of warfare, economic warfare, when we're engaging in extremely harsh sanctions. Obviously, SWIFT is being kind of overblown because, the Russian banks that deal with the gas are going to be not a part of SWIFT. So, you know, it's kind of like a half measure here. You know, the O0 inner circle of Putin's oligarchy, you know, somehow haven't really fully had their accounts and assets and Western properties fully seized. So, I mean, there is some half measures to some regard.
Shut up, Fabio. Okay, I'm done hearing you talk. Okay, I'm sorry, but yeah, we should be what's it called? Going by the treaty. I'm sorry, we should just be doing that. We should be defending Ukraine's sovereignty. When we are not doing that, when we're not doing economic sanctions and provide. Shut up. Okay. Well, anyways, treaty or not treaty, whatever.
Idiot.
You're an idiot. You're the one who's been talking like a fucking idiot this entire time, bro. I'm just fucking stunned. I'm fucking stunned at what you're saying. Okay, let me finish what I'm going to say. Okay, we should send weapons. We should continue with the economic sanctions, because if we don't, they're going to be like already even more fucked. We've already got millions of refugees coming out of Ukraine. Yeah, they're just completely leveling it. They're making it completely unlivable. They're destroying infrastructure, which is like the #1 cause of death in war, not even like the war itself. Yeah, I'm sorry. I support it. I support 100% us going in there, providing weapons and doing economic sanctions. And if we need to, if we really need to, which, you know, I'm hoping we don't need to, but if we need to, then maybe we will provide forces. But that's like a last resort, right? Yeah, that's it.
Towards what end, Stardust? Let's say the sanctions didn't prevent this from happening. Somebody might look at this and say the increasing economic sanctions after the Crimea sort of continued a series of isolation from the West, which has asphyxiated Russia and made them desperate. So I'm wondering,
how did it make them desperate to invade Ukraine?
To increase their self-determination.
Okay.
To isolate them from the vicissitudes of whether the West wants to decide whether they want to live and die. So I'm curious about when you strengthen these sanctions that haven't worked in the past, it's going to continue to exacerbate them, make them feel isolated, make them dynamic. It's going to probably radicalize and exacerbate the existing dynamic within Russia. There's already crackdowns on people. I think Putin has made himself basically coup-proof by having basically the police go and crack down on any kind of dissent. So I'm wondering if it's not an interstitial step into boots on the ground, what is the point of the sanctions unless you're just saying that is what you want? You want to do this to destabilize. So when you send troops in, it's more effective.
The point of sanctions, war, as we know, war is a very expensive endeavor. The point of sanctions is to make that war even more expensive, to make it even less incentivized for the people who are doing the war. It is meant to put pressure on the Russian government. And these are all things that we can see happening in real time. These sanctions have been the most effective sanctions I've ever seen. I mean, again, you can look at how many days the Moscow exchange has been closed. I mean, the ruble has fallen enormously. So yeah, these economic sanctions, they're and while I don't support all of these like individual things, I think in general these economic sanctions are incredibly effective at putting a lot of pressure on Russia. And I mean, we're already seeing like they are realizing that their military equipment is not up to par. And now with the sanctions, they're having trouble getting machinery from other countries, and they can't even get it from China now. So yes, what is also part of those sanctions? Part of those sanctions is that as soon as they withdraw from Ukraine, those sanctions end. That's it. That is part of it. It is built into it.
Mythic, you were saying that
they don't end though.
They do.
Guys, sorry.
It's part of it. It's in page 4 of this. Sorry.
There's multiple people talking at once, and so I want to just have an order here. So Mythic and Stardust's engagements, we're gonna go that. We're gonna go to Sparky, then to Loner in that order. Okay? Dope. Just want everybody to know that.
Okay. Above and beyond,
Sorry, Ty. Sorry.
I'm just curious about the mechanism that there's allusions to the sanctions ending, but that there's nothing like no key agreement that's saying that at this time we're going to withdraw. Would that include fully withdrawing out of Donbass, not wrecking the provisional the districts? I'm worried about that. And then not only that, there's also the existing ones from Crimea. So this is the sanctions are just the cherry on the top of the cupcake of the existing economic isolation of Russia.
Well, this is specifically about the Russian troops moving into Ukraine. That's what so the first round of sanctions that happened were directly to stop what they had done 16 days ago of moving troops into Ukraine. It was directly. It wasn't to do with Donbass. It wasn't to do with Crimea. This was a separate round of sanctions, the ones that we're just recently seeing. Now you can maybe argue that I think. Maybe last week, I think there was a new round of sanctions that they didn't have that pointed goal and then some people are speculating the goal might be regime change. I don't think I would agree with that. But yeah, no, the goal was pretty specific.
The sanctions are that once they meet the criteria, they're not sanctioned anymore.
Yeah, Mythic, I also want to ask you another question. You said that maybe the sanctions led up to this from Crimea, but how far back do you want to go? Do you think Crimea was annexed because of sanctions or what?
No, I that's good pushback. No, I don't necessarily think that. And to be honest, I don't know a lot about the pre-existing conditions that led to the annexation of Crimea, and just sort of in the last couple months have looked into that and what's meant for the geopolitical strata in Europe. But what I'm looking at broadly as is sort of like, here's my thing. As a communist, I look at this, and to me, this is all seems like an inevitable play out of neoliberalism and the liberalizing of markets post World War II in Europe, and the Iron Curtain, or the isolation of the Marshall Plan, and the Iron Curtain on the other side. And that divide hasn't really ever been ameliorated. It seems like NATO and specifically the U.S. has exacerbated any sort of trade relations with Germany and Russia that we've been able to. And this is just the gentleman earlier was talking about the gradation of war. I feel like this is part of a gradation of isolation. So when asked if not sanctions, what? I would say actual diplomacy. And if neoliberalism is the default go-to modality, then we have to integrate with Russia economically in the same way that we have with China, or else these things are going to continue to happen.
Well, one of the problems was the economic integration for Hungary. Hungary has the infrastructure and the economy to do a balancing act between Russia and the EU. Ukraine didn't have that. So Ukraine was in a position where they were giving about a quarter of their exports went to the EU, another quarter went to the Eurasian customs zone. But their incomes, the average incomes in Ukraine before 2013 were stagnant since 1989. It was a really poor performing economy, which is why it was in their interest and why it was so popular for them to go with the EU, because you play the two off against each other, you get a better deal from one. I don't know why neoliberalism plays much of a factor here, because if you were talking neoliberalism as in what internationalizing and growing trade blocks and privatization, well, Russia does that as well. It's just that you can say the whole trade compromise in terms of neoliberalism, but compromise wasn't working for the Ukrainian people. It was about them as well as just the EU and the Eurasian customs, right?
Well, so there's a problem with this, right? And this is, I think, twofold. I mean, there's a ton of other things. Obviously, we could go into history lessons over, the next 1,000 hours. But one of the two things I'd like to highlight is, first, Russia has always sought a kind of a buffer zone between the West and itself. I mean, this was why they were in Afghanistan in the 80s, right? They've constantly attempted to do this. And when you look at countries like Latvia, for example, that are basically, doing whatever the EU wants to do, and they've basically been absorbed as part of into that culturally and economically. And then you see what's occurring in Ukraine, where Ukraine is heavily involved with American companies, heavily doing a lot of its economic training. And then also, the Donbass region is a complete total fucking mess that nobody really understands, because there's so much fucking propaganda on both sides. But obviously, what we do know is that there are people dying there, and there is a highly ethnic Russian population there, and Russia is seeking this buffer zone. And when you say, well, we should be doing diplomacy and this war is wrong, obviously, starting a surprise war like it's the early game in a fucking Civ match is a fucking problem. But at the same time, when you have the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is shutting down news agencies that are too pro-Russian, and has individual political, political people, and has some level of political prisoners, depending upon how invested in Russian media or how invested in Western media you are. It's hard to tell, at least on that regard. And you do have issues occurring in this region. How are they supposed to engage with this in a diplomatic perspective when their own news media agencies are banned in the country, right? Like they're kind of in between a rock and a hard place. And what they did is obviously morally wrong, and we should condemn them for it. But at the same time, like,
are you talking about?
There was several media sources that were shut down. I don't have the exact names of each one.
And exactly.
Was one of them RT?
I mean, no, it wasn't RT. This happened before any of that stuff, and this occurred. New York Times did a whole article about it. Actually, it's pretty interesting. News.
What's
media
interesting though
site.
is
We can give you a second to look that up. We'll throw it over to Sparky.
look.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Wait. Actually, Sparky, before we throw it over to you, I almost did. Well, actually, it's Sparky then Tiberius. So Sparky, sorry.
So a lot of people are taking Putin at his word that he's there for the Donetsk region and stuff. No, he's there for minerals. Let's be honest. Ukraine is rich with titanium, uranium, graphite, mercury, copper, manganese, and stuff like that. And it all happens to be right around the areas he was talking about. And if you actually listen to Putin's speech, he was talking about history and stuff, because the historic capital of the Rus Empire is Kiev anyway. Look, he's not looking at just making a buffer. He's using that as an excuse. If you look at the actual region, the region there, and you look at the natural resources there that are in abundance, 20% of the world's graphite exists in Ukraine. Titanium, they have 15 sites for titanium. 4 of them are currently being mined. He is in it for the minerals. He is doing this all for the minerals. You don't go to war. You don't risk lives for nothing. He's working. He's trying to prevent the West from getting access to titanium, because one of the things that have actually kept the Russian Federation afloat post-Soviet era has been the sale of titanium to the West. And with the Ukraine cozying up to the West, this is actually giving a way to cut out Russia. So look, it's you're thinking, you're listening to the rhetoric and following it. It's all a joke. Everything you see on the news, almost the majority of what you're seeing on the news right now, is a farce. For Christ's sakes, people actually thought the ghost of Kiev was a real thing. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
so
just going to
just
ask
real quick.
Fabian something, because
I just got it. So it's
I do want to confirm Ghost of Kiev is real, and I'm the shill of Kiev. Okay.
There you go.
We
So
work
that would
in
be-
tandem.
There'll be 112 Ukraine, News One, and ZIK, television channels owned and operated by. Oh my God, I can't remember. I'd have to look again at the article, but basically they used allegations of treason, not a trial. They wasn't convicted, to be able to shut down news agencies from 2 investors that were Russian investors in the media. Now, were they biased media sources? Probably, right? I mean, obviously, right? But when you start shutting down press in your country that goes against you, and you start to realize that diplomatic negotiations become more and more difficult when you have an ethnically Russian population in one area, far more population that tends to lean more Ukrainian in another. There's accusations of a lot of things going on. Again, this is the fog of war, so we don't really know.
So I
Fabian,
guess my question would be, so these are Ukraine shutting down TV channels owned by like Russia friendly people. So
Well, there was allegations of treason,
Okay.
but again, not a conviction.
I'm just
So
confused.
not innocent until proven guilty.
Fabian, do you think Churchill was wrong to ban fascist literature in Britain without any legal precedent
I
during the
think
Second World
banning
War?
communist, fascist, socialist literature in all of its forms is wrong.
During the
So you
war as
think-
well,
so-
right?
So you think during
Yes.
World War II they should
Okay.
have let Germany propaganda just spread across Europe?
Yes.
That was my first question. It's okay. I had another one as well. You keep on pointing to the ethnically Russian majority in Donbass and Luhansk, it's worth pointing out, just in case anyone needs to hear it, none of these regions have ever had majority support for secession or for like anything. I think
No, they
the best that
haven't.
they've had is they support federalization or just like autonomy, but within Ukraine. Secession has never been like particularly popular in any of these regions. All right.
Okay,
I mean-
I'll let Fabian respond
ahead.
quick, but I want to throw it to Tiberius if you want to respond.
When I'm talking about ethnically, I'm talking about, you know, this region has an overwhelming majority of people where they believe that Russian is their first language. They're very culturally Russian, and they're facing, you know, the UN reports hundreds of dead like every year in this region, supposedly from being attacked from eastern Ukraine. Like, it's not a good situation. Similar things can be said about the other side in Crimea, right? And people will say, oh, well, they shut off their water, and it's like, well, these people voted to have their water shut off, right? Like, it's not like we're. I think so many people are looking at this trying to empathize, and I totally understand empathy, you know, like trying to have that empathy, but they're trying to think about the situation through the lens of the world that they live in without realizing that the world that they live in is totally fucking different, right? Like, they're not.
I know you're not referring to the referendum in Crimea in 2014, where
In
you're saying
what
they
regards?
voted. You said they voted to have their water turned off. I know you're not referring to the referendum, the Crimea referendum in 2014. I know you're not referring to that.
No, what's this? I thought that was 2016. Let me look it up again.
Well, the referendum was 2014
Well,
No,
Crimea
the water
was
shut
for
off.
the
annexed.
water.
Crimea
Yes, but
was
you
annexed
said
for
they
a warm
voted.
water
You
port
said they
for
voted
Russia.
for it.
So after
said
they
they
were
voted
annexed,
for it.
I don't really know if any vote counts after they've been annexed, right? Like,
Let me
And the
look that up.
Crimea
Wait,
referendum is
quick, I gotta
is
quiz.
widely-
I gotta quiz the room. Does anybody in here know what the two options on the 2014 referendum were?
yep, it was either the 1912 thing or it was be with Russia. But so neither result would have got them back with Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah, neither. There was not even there's not even an option to go back to Ukraine.
Not even to
And
mention the water
this-
supply, if you know about that one as well, like because that water supply is a canal of fresh water that leads from mainland Ukraine into Crimea. A canal that was incidentally built under Khrushchev, like, and the reason it was able to be built was because Khrushchev transferred Crimea over to Ukraine. So when Russia annexes that territory and then starts putting their naval, like their ships into that canal, which is very threatening to Ukraine, of course they're going to close it. Yeah, they're not going to supply water to a region that's not their country. Yeah.
This referendum in 2014 was globally and widely seen as an illegal referendum and was not accepted globally. Even though Russia wanted to be accepted globally, it was not accepted globally. So I'm confused as to why you're saying the Crimeans voted to have their water turned off. If you can supply anything for that claim, that would be great.
The whole reason why Crimea was annexed to begin
Wait,
with by Russia was
one
so
second.
they'd have access to the Black Sea.
Well, okay, yes, but I want to throw it over to
Well,
Tiberius.
they already
Tiberius has
had
been-
access to the
I'll-
Black
I'm
No,
gonna give-
There's shipyards over there that they needed. That's why they're going to take Odessa too, because it's the only one that can handle their deep water vessels.
Appreciate it. I've got three notes here that I want to just kind of bang through here real quick. Number one, what's the point of the sanctions? The phase 1 sanctions and the phase 2 sanctions. That's largely the SWIFT SWIFT system sanctions. You're talking levels of sanctioning that could actually force civilizational collapse. Like literally, the goal of those two, for the Russian people is that you have red lines again, like you had back in 1990 and 91, to where people are waiting 4 or 5 hours just to get bread. It doesn't matter how popular you are or how much you are an oil exporting dictatorship. If your people don't get food, they don't support you in any way. They will tear your ass down. So that is goal number one. Now, if the phase 5 sanctions come in, that goes out against the institution as a whole, because we're talking about an oil exporting dictatorship that is very happy just to turn people into Swiss cheese. But if you go after their main revenue source that actively keeps the institution funded, that's a whole other story. Now, the big question here is, number one, looking into the spring, yeah, you can probably tell Europeans, hey, we're going to use less oil and gas from Russia. But what happens come a year from now when we're going back into the winter? Like, this is a big sell that I'm not 100% is going to happen. Number two, just to show actually how important Ukraine is, for Sparky's comments, whenever the Cold War was going on, 20% of the U.S. nuclear arsenal was pointed by itself. This area is incredibly strategically important. It is one of the biggest producers of fertilizer. It's the second biggest grain producer in all of Europe.
The basket of Europe.
Yeah, the Dnieper River Valley is one of the most economically active zones within Eastern Europe as a whole. Like this literally is the homeland of the Kievan Rus. The last thing though, what is Russia's actual objectives? Because I don't think anyone's actually even talking about that in the media. I think the true objective is they want NATO to go back to the 1994. This is the one thing I actually do believe Putin on when he says this, when he tells his people that he believes that the Russians were lied to. He believes that NATO is an existential threat to the Russian state of being, and he's kind of right in that. And he wants to push NATO all the way back to where the Poles aren't members anymore. What's the plan to do that? From what looks like to me, the Ukrainian refugee wave that is forming out of this is the actual true strategic goal of this operation. Is that he wants to do what he did in Syria, where he sent a million refugees screaming into Europe, that basically made Germany go from a stable nation to having its AfD, its far right wing party, triple in size in less than a year. This is actually Russia's master plan. He wants to send 5 million Ukrainians screaming into Poland and Germany, and if they can't keep this ship together, that's probably the end of NATO. That's the actual goal.
That sounds suspiciously like something out of a comic book. I don't.
This is
His goals are he has actually stated goals as well. They said they wanted neutrality for Ukraine. They wanted to finish the demilitarization of the country. The ambiguity about that is very concerning. And then he wants the Crimea and the Donbass and Luhansk region to be recognized.
Yes. He has made those points. However, if you actually look, since about 2007, he's been very, very clear that he thought the expansion of NATO was an existential threat to the Russian Federation. And he's been gearing up. Like literally after he started beating this drum, we saw the invasion of Georgia the following year. He waited a little while because they militarily performed like shit in Georgia. Well, they absolutely beat the hell out of the Georgians. Is that the Russian army doctrine was centered around corps commanders and army commanders. These are literally 3- and 4-star generals. They figured that they needed to move that down to at least division commanders, which are major generals, or brigadier generals, which are 1 or 2 star. That it's a lot more local on the field. We saw that actually very successful in 2014 because with the Little Green Men, that was a very smash and sweep operation. But it looks like they tried to do that again here in 2022, and the big thing is it's not going the way they planned it. This is why we're seeing these weird things where it's 2 weeks into an invasion and Kiev is still holding it. Russians are not playing by their normal doctrine at all.
I don't think that they're actually trying to take Kiev. Because I mean, if they really wanted to take it,
they would have flattened it.
And they would, yeah.
They would flatten it like Grozny. Like if the Russians really wanted to, they would turn it into Grozny.
I mean, look, the Chechens are probably the ones that's given Russia their biggest black eye in recent history, and I severely doubt they really want to see the Ukrainians do that. If they really wanted to sweep in, they would be doing it completely different. They would do it via the way we went into Iraq and everything else.
Can I ask you a question, Sparky?
What?
Sorry, I'm not supposed to do it, but I ask you a question. Why did the Russian government use VDV paratroopers to try to take the Hostomel airport with basically no support? Then they got slaughtered if they didn't try to take it on the first.
Why did they drop them at 5,000 feet? Why do we really know they were VDV? See, that's a deal.
Yeah,
Just
we
because,
do.
Oh, you do? You do.
We do.
You speak Russian. You understand. You understand all their unit patches and everything. I'm just asking.
Yes,
I don't know that, and I don't trust
yes.
anything coming out of the media right now. Because
what's the point in talking to you?
There's video
What's the point in
footage.
asking?
Jeez, dude.
There's
I
video
don't
footage.
trust any
Wait,
reports.
Stop, everybody, stop. I'm not gonna have everybody pile. I'm just interested. If there was video footage of 34 helicopters, this is not like fake video footage, going to the airport and bombing it before the paratroopers
They tried to
dropped.
take it. No, they tried to. So they did try to secure it. If they really wanted to do it right, they would have done it completely differently.
Yeah, because they're incompetent. So the thing is, they did it incompetently. That would be the argument.
I think they're actually trying to save the infrastructure and stuff, so they don't
They're
have to
not,
bother
though.
with rebuilding after
Okay.
they take it.
They've
They're
bombed
not.
quite a lot of infrastructure.
They've been destroying infrastructure. Like, people are dying because of the amount of infrastructure that's been fucking deleted. So
bombing
I gotta
civilians.
I gotta split hairs here, because here's what we've seen in Russian history versus what we've seen in this particular invasion. Usually, this invasion would be a lot quicker, and there would be a hell of a lot higher body count if the Russians were playing to their traditional doctrine. Because what they do is before they move into an area, they shell the living dog shit out of it with artillery.
Yes.
And we're not talking a little bit here and there. We're talking brigade level artillery units will flatten a fucking
days
Do
long.
you know what would happen? Do you know what would happen if Russia did that?
Nothing.
Tiberius, do
Nothing
you know
would
what happened
happen.
if Russia? No, there would be a huge pushback from the rest of the world. NATO would instantly be on Ukraine's side. I guarantee there'd be boots on ground.
NATO is on
There would be
Ukraine's side.
Shut up,
is just trying to. Russia's just trying to evade the United States, Germany, British, NATO to go in and actually help Ukraine. They're probably happy now that we're not helping Ukraine. All we're doing is putting economic sanctions on them, but they're trying to evade us actually going in and helping Ukraine militarily.
So here's the real question, and I think this is actually the gambit that Putin was making, is that NATO was never going to show up to the party. I think that's really what the conclusion was, is that the Germans do not have a military that can fight. The French are not going to cross half of fucking Europe to defend the Ukrainians. And the Americans here are divided at home, and we don't agree on even what to do here at home, let alone somewhere else. So I think Putin calculated correctly that we weren't going to join the party, and we never are going to join the party. So what is the actual operation here? I think he's pushing in. He's going to see the sanctions, and we're in a race. Either our system breaks because we just had 5 million Ukrainian refugees flood into Europe, or their system breaks because people are waiting 4 hours for bread. That's literally where we are right now.
So if the Americans were never going to join the party and are never going to join the party, like you said, then why do we have roughly 11,000 troops on Ukraine's border? So we have roughly 9,000 in Poland and roughly 2,000 in Romania. So why do we have roughly 11,000 troops
in Romania?
It's because literally the Poles were screaming bloody murder. It's like, get your ass over here right now. And so we sent 18th Airborne Corps over there. And of course, half of the forces ain't even there yet. But
that's the 82nd Airborne. But yeah,
82nd Airborne's already deployed. The 101st will be shipping out here in about a week and a half. And then you'll see, 4th Mountain Division and all the auxiliary units going with it over the next month. The entire Corps is going to get deployed into largely Poland and Romania and a little bit of the Baltic states.
But why send the 82nd Airborne if we're not going to end up in combat? The 82nd Airborne is a combat unit.
It's because the 82nd Airborne is the primary fast action movie force of the United States military. We could send 3rd Corps over there in Fort Hood, but we can't because it takes 45 days just to get the Abrams over there because the fucker's 70 damn ton.
Yeah, it takes.
I don't disagree. Getting tanks over there would be a slow process.
Yeah, so literally the reason why that we sent 18th Airborne Corps and particularly the 82nd Airborne Division at first and foremost is that it's our rapid action development forces. We can move that force, and that we're talking a division level force, in about 72 hours anywhere in the world and be combat effective when they get off the plane. There's not a lot of other forces that we have that can do that outside of the 101st. Literally that Corps, the 18th Airborne Corps, is built to do that.
But that's the design of airborne battalions. That's what they're designed to do. When you're looking at armored corps divisions, they are not designed to get over there in a moment's notice. The 82nd Airborne is essentially the international 911 brigade you send out when something happens. That is their mission. That's what they train to do. That is what they do, and they do it well. That's why the 101st.
The question has still been skirted. If we're never going to join,
I just want to interject here. I think it's 2.5 million people, not 5 million.
No. It's 2.5, but the actual operational objective is to generate probably about 3 to 6 million refugees out of Ukraine over the course of the next month.
I mean, if we're just guessing Putin's secret intentions, I don't why are we doing that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been watching this. What I thought this invasion was going to happen 7 years ago. So this is not anything new for me at all.
Hey, and when you look at invading another sovereign country,
wait, what did you see? I'm sorry. What did you see 7 years ago that indicated
soil?
There are a total of how many Ukrainians live in Ukraine.
Wait, stop. So there's 44 million. But Loner asked Tiberius a question. I want to make sure Tiberius can respond to that. Loner, can you repeat the question?
I wanted to know what you've been watching for the last 7 years that has given you this insight into Putin's covert strategy.
Yeah, and so I get to talk with a lot of graybeards. Particularly, there's a user named Colonel Dan here on Twitch that you guys can talk to. He's a retired Air Force colonel, so I get to talk with people like this all the time. Anyway, long story short is that there was two things that we saw. Number one, Russia is in a box, primarily demography. Forget Europe or Western Europe and how they're running out of kids. The Russians had a birth collapse post-Soviet Union back in 1991 that literally limited the size of how big the Red Army could be by 60%. Is that literally that's how much their birth rate dropped off. Now it's recovering slowly after the Cold War, but they knew that the Red Army was going to go from about 2 million men down to about 1. And it was going to hit somewhere around 2017. Whenever we didn't see that, I thought the invasion was probably kind of done for because that they kind of missed their window where they could use normal Russian doctrine of just flooding the area with armor and manpower and taking it over. So I thought we kind of averted that. But what I have seen out of the Russians for about the last 5 years is that the original sanctions back in 2014 have made it to where the Russians cannot re-equip themselves like they originally intended. The T-14 Armada, yeah, absolutely wonderful tank. They have 2 of them because they can't fund the weapons programs anymore to actually replace their former equipment that's aging. The T-90 is now a 30-year-old tank, and it's not operationally viable for what they want to do with the damn. So yeah, they're using old equipment, and they're basically, at least for me, showing that they think they're cornered. And if they don't do something now, Russia's over. The funny thing is that they may have preempted it to where Russia's over anyway. So I don't know. I'll put it this way. I think this is a little bit psychotic, but this is what you do when you are panicked, is that you make panicky moves and panicky decisions. And I think that's what the invasion of Ukraine was.
Okay. It's fine. It's okay.
Are you wanting to go, Stardust? Because my question was still skirted.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead with your.
Okay, so you guys keep saying they're there simply to protect the Polish, but you wouldn't need 11,000 troops just to protect the Polish. You wouldn't need that. You wouldn't need that amount of troops just to protect the Polish. You see this in other countries where we have a much less troops, and people are literally scared to go there just simply because there's American troops there. Because if you hit an American troop, you've got the full force of the American military against you. So again, my question stands: why do we have 11,000 troops surrounding the Ukrainian border if we are certainly never going to join Ukraine's side against Russia? Obviously not nuclear, because nuclear war is mutually assured destruction, but we're talking about non-nuclear war.
I mean, again, it's a lot of guesswork, and I'm not sure why this conversation is so fucking far off topic. So I'm just chilling because I'm listening to a whole bunch of people that pretend to know what's going on, and I think maybe Lonerbox and Dylan might be the only ones that actually understand what's going on. But that being said, sometimes shows of force can be symbolic in nature, man. Right? Like, so it doesn't have to be like that they're actually doing anything.
No, but what I'm saying is Tiberius.
Wait. We'll let him finish.
I'm just saying it just as easily could be the same thing as, Belarus wanting nukes back, right? Just as like a hey, just so you know, we're scary, right? America could be doing the same shit, moving troops in and saying like, hey, we're just here to help evacuees and stuff, but also putting a large enough force there that like, lets other people know like, hey, don't forget, we could fuck you up if we really wanted to, right? Like, we don't know. Like, so to guess everybody's intentions, to guess Putin's intentions and to guess like, what do the people in Russia think? Well, who fucking knows? Because if you get in a protest group larger than 2, like you end up in a fucking gulag sometimes. Like, what do the Ukrainian people think? Well, who fucking knows? Because it's a fog of war. Like, I think there's a lot of moving pieces here that are really, really difficult for us to understand. And we won't really understand until later when the history books are written about it. And so, I mean, I don't know. Like, it just seems like a moot point.
Here's what I'm pushing back against.
Sprouts, do you mind if I go really quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say it before it escapes me. If we can all agree then that if birth rates are like part of the reason, then you guys should probably start manning up Pearl Harbor again, because Japan has definitely got a problem there. Okay, sorry.
So what I was pushing back against was Tiberius and aircraft that are absolutely positive that the United States is never going to join Ukraine in their fight. They're absolutely sure of it, that it's never going to happen. And I'm confused as to what makes them absolutely sure of it. I mean, have they been in the Russian meetings with Putin where Putin says, I'm definitely not going to do, they're definitely not going to do this? Have they been to have they been to US meetings where Biden says we're definitely not going to do this in top secret meetings? I'm just curious on where they're getting this information, because I haven't seen that information to where the US is definitely not going to help Ukraine defend its own country.
It makes no strategic sense to engage with Russia over Ukraine. I understand that that's maybe a little bit too out of your scope of vision, but the reason why there's people in Poland is because they're a NATO ally, and the same reason why we sent Vice President knee pads down there is to make the Poles feel better.
So all of NATO put economic sanctions on Russia.
I mean,
yes,
so
all of NATO and their forces. If you understand, 70% of NATO's strength is the United States military. Germany won't even be combat effective for another fucking decade. NATO is toothless without America, and if America doesn't show that they are there to support their NATO allies, NATO is dead anyway.
Okay, real quick. I'm Sprouticus. I'm 100% with you. I think the fog of war is in a situation where we don't fucking know, and guesswork is kind of silly. But if you wanted some evidence of their position, I don't know. The president of America tweeted out today, I want to be clear, we will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full might of a united and galvanized NATO, but we will not fight a war against Russia in Ukraine. A direct confrontation between NATO and Russia is World War III and something we must strive to prevent. Okay, I'm with you. Who fucking knows? But I mean, the president literally said that he. I
don't necessarily trust presidential statements.
Neither do I. So I was just saying. So I was like, here's some evidence.
When it comes to this time period, I don't necessarily trust presidential statements, because they can say something and be planning something exactly the opposite in the back room because they don't want Russia to know that we could join Ukraine, and that's entirely possible. But at this point in time, I don't really trust presidential statements, because we're in a weird point in time where Ukraine's fighting a battle, and are we going to join? Aren't we going to join? Becomes a real question.
Yeah, I'm with you. You just said, like, what's the evidence? And I'm like, the president of the United States himself today.
I want to answer Sprout's question from my end. The reason why an entire airborne division is over in Europe is because we just saw the Russians move 12 divisions in Ukraine, and the Poles are scared shitless. Not only the Poles, but we also have the Romanians and the Estonians, the Latvians, the Baltic states. Yeah, one division doesn't stop 12. There's a reason they're literally gearing up to send the entire corps to Europe. Is that in the event that Russia is actually that crazy and they would actually attack a NATO country, you're not going to need just 18th Airborne Corps. You're going to need 3rd and 5th Corps to deploy to Europe as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We're going to need 10th Mountain over there. But what I am stating is that it wouldn't be hard for 82nd Airborne to defend their own while 10th Mountain gets their ass over there. We've done this before. Air Force can move almost instantaneously. So it's not like things like this have not been done before.
Well,
you could pull 10th Mountain out of Korea pretty quickly too.
10th Mountain's in Georgia. Anyway,
wait. What about 12th Unicorn?
10th Mountain's in Drum,
and as well as
7th Guerrilla.
Yeah.
Aren't they
anyway,
also in Fort Polk?
The long and the
4th
short
Tortoise.
Oh my! Shut up, Dylan.
Are they not in Fort Polk anymore?
Anyway,
I'm looking it up right now. 10th Mountain. I guess 10th Mountain still has some soldiers in Korea, but Army Times says they have 300 soldiers in Korea. But
I thought they had more than that. All right,
it's mostly second ID that mans Korea.
All right. Well, it's been a few years for me. Sorry.
Anyway, long story short here is that, we can move forces pretty quickly, but the problem is, even with all the C-17s and C-5s that we have, is that you're talking about a brigade pretty much a day that we can deploy anywhere in the world. That's still, we're talking, when this all adds up, is that it takes, a month to move a full corps because of how big this shit is. And it's heavy. And these are the light forces. Forget flying Abrams tanks across the ocean. That takes forever.
Can we just say, like, the topic is sanctions, and now we're talking about 57th lizard, okay? I don't care. So we got to bring it back to sanctions, okay? And we've got like a few more minutes left on sanctions. So does anybody have anything left to say on sanctions?
Yes, I'm
Sanctions
really
are
curious
based-
how this thing has not been about sanctions at all. Thank you, Dylan. I'm very curious. What does the panel think? Broadly speaking, how do these sanctions help? First of all, I'm curious what you guys think that the Russia should do in the other than not invading Ukraine. It seems to be we've been encapsulating them to do something, but it seems like we have a schizoid policy. I'm not sure what everybody wants Russia to do other than pull out of Ukraine. It seems
Well,
like
they should probably give Crimea back and to stop arbitrarily recognizing separatist regions that don't have popular support in eastern Ukraine.
You think they're going to give Crimea back?
Probably not. Yeah, but I'd like to. Yeah, but that's like again the sanctions that were placed on them since the invasion aren't about that. So
Yeah.
So
the sanctions are
but there
specifically
have
about
been
Ukraine.
sanctions in place since 2014. So should the sanctions stay in place forever if they refuse to give Crimea back?
The way that the sanctions work are specifically about the ones that we're talking about are the ones are specifically about Ukraine. As soon as they withdraw from Ukraine, the sanctions go away.
yeah, and I think like again. Historically, okay, you can look at sanctions since like the like early like 20th century. They tend to not work. They tend to not influence behavior. Generally, it's either on very small countries, like Russia uses the threat of sanctions to pull Eastern European countries into their trade deals, or with military strength, you can achieve things alongside sanctions. But I think when it comes to Crimea, obviously people don't want to like escalate into a full-on war over Crimea, but it's like, I think if you're going to annex a territory arbitrarily, then yeah, like I think the world should make it like difficult for you somehow, right?
Well, they should make it difficult to a point, and I can agree with that. The problem is when you go too broad, you go too heavy, you're not actually hurting the Russian government. You are hurting the Russian people, and you're not going to change anything in this. When Russia decided they were going to invade Ukraine, I assure you, they said they were going to take the Donetsk and Donbass regions. They're going to take it all the way over to the river, at least, at very minimum, because they've got to get something out of it. If they're going to engage, put their equipment and their people into combat, put them in harm's way, Russia has to get something out of it. It is about the minerals. It makes more sense. It is about Russia controlling the world market with things like titanium and things like that, because we have isolated Russia economically. And one of the ways for them to get back into the world economic stage is to have almost complete control over specific minerals. So Russia has a good bit of the world's titanium. Ukraine has a pretty large amount themselves. And with Ukraine cozying up to the West, well, that really starts to infringe on Russia's market, and that's hurting them economically in the long run. This is something that I think that they are doing to save their economic lives.
Yeah, and the
I
gas
don't
and
really-
oil reserves, in eastern Ukraine, they're trying to seize those up so they can't be leveraged against the existing Russian market for oil and gas. There's that, but they definitely did the calculus before they went in. They 100% knew there was going to be severe economic sanctions for doing this. But the problem is they've been sanctioned so long, they've been seeking other ways around them with other countries' trade partners like China. They've been doing this for a while. They know what the outcome is going to be. And I think we need to do the calculus ourselves of if these people continue to be more and more self-determined and encapsulated, we need to figure out what we're going to do for the long-term plans to bring them back in, because increasing sanctions isn't going to do it. It's just going to exacerbate the divide even more. So I think we need to pick a different tack.
These
just that you're trying to-
sanctions are
like,
so
you're trying to
different.
Wait. Okay, everybody shut up. Everybody, so that immediately went off the wall. Okay, who wants to respond to that?
Can
Okay.
I just ask Lonerbox a quick question? for
Okay,
something
so I'll
said?
write everybody. Okay, wait. Actually, I'm gonna throw it to Parker because Parker hasn't said anything in forever, and they raised their hands. Everybody else who wanted to speak, raise your hand quick. I'll write your name down, and I'll tell you when to put your hands down. Okay, continue, Parker.
So I just want to ask the question: if we're not doing sanctions, what are we doing? Because I know you said diplomacy earlier, but that was kind of like a really broad statement.
Oh, are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Trade compacts,
Put your
trade
hand up.
deals, exactly the type of thing that Russia went when he sat before NATO and condemned them for. Look, we're funding you guys are doing all the things, we're paying for these things, and what do? You go make a pipeline with Germany. We need more pipelines with Germany. We need more interdeveloped economies with the rest of the Europe between Russia. We need economic if neoliberalism is the lay of the land, if global capital is the lay of the land, if we're done with national protectionist policies, we need to integrate the economies. Pipelines are a literal line in between, so we need to connect those economies up, or else these exacerbate. They're going to continue to happen.
So if the Ukrainians decide that since the early 90s that a compromised trade deal between Russia and Europe isn't working for them, and they show a very clear democratic will, a popular will to go with the EU more, I don't know, it sounds like you're taking an imperialist perspective here by saying that the two superpowers should compromise, even though that's not what the people of Ukraine wanted.
Yeah, there is an element, and there is an unfortunate. I do feel like a little bit of to stave off a World War III type conflict, and to in the light of the past, since 1946 history of the liberalization and EU is European unionization of the economies there, that those states in the Eastern Bloc have sort of been already marginalized, and there is an element of sort of feeding Ukraine into the meat grinder so as to stave off a larger economic and military conflict. And I do appreciate that, and it is unfortunate. I don't have a fast answer of what to do about that, other than broadly try to integrate them in other trade policies that aren't so vehemently reflexively anti-Russia, and that don't exacerbate red lines that have been previously stated by Russia and understood through diplomatic cables. We've understood that Ukraine, NATO, EU, and that has been a red line we've known for a long time. So we keep on playing fast and loose with that, and then doing surprise Pikachu face when Russia does shit like this.
Okay, so my second point is then you would need to demonstrate that any kind of diplomacy or compromise is actually going to guarantee Ukraine's safety from Russia, because it's not as if Russia's encroachment on Ukraine was a response to sanctions. Whether it was it's been conventional wisdom since at least 2010 that Russia wanted to annex Crimea, or even in 2003 when Russia tried to encroach on the Tuzla Island that's off Crimea as well. This goes way further back, and it's not as if sanctions caused Russia to use the Sevastopol port to launch attacks on Georgia, knowing full well that retaliation from Georgia would have hit Ukraine, even though they weren't at war with Georgia. So that's the bit I'm missing. I'm missing where you think this kind of I'm going to call it appeasement guarantees the safety of places like Ukraine.
It doesn't guarantee the safety of Ukraine. You're correct. I don't have a fast answer for that. But also, it's not explicitly because of sanctions that the isolation occurred. The isolation occurred just because we've done everything we can. There seems to be native, when you go back and just broadly, I only know the bullet points on this thing. From in my head, NATO is specifically to keep Russia out, keep Germany down, and keep America in Europe. And under that very basic rubric, it seems like literally keeping Russia out has been the modality. So maybe reevaluating that underlying thing might ameliorate this versus worried about smaller trade compacts.
Do you think there could have been more of a guarantee for Ukraine if there was some kind of I don't know, defense agreement relating to nuclear weapons and other nuclear countries?
I don't think they should have given up their nukes.
Well, can I ask the question?
Yep. So we're gonna go Fabian, Sprout, and then Stardust in that order.
Loner.
Yeah,
I'm just a little confused, right? And like I said, I'm no fucking expert on this. Maybe you have information that I don't have, but as far as you keep saying over and over and over again that the Donbass region, they don't want to be free or independent in any way. The problem that I have with that, and maybe you're aware of some information that I'm not, is that we have evidence of failed referendum, right? We have evidence of kind of mock, votes for independence that even Russia didn't recognize. And then we have some polling data from Ukrainian controlled areas. And then we also have polling data from the DNR and LNR and independence or rebel groups or however you want to label it areas. I'm trying to understand, how are you so confident in the region that has multiple powers at play where it's very difficult to get information, that you're just very, very quickly and kind of just saying, no, these people don't want independence. Like, I just know that. Like, what,
okay.
do you have some evidence I'm missing or something?
You're right. So I'm going mostly just by, like, I don't know, polling data from Pew, etc. You can say there's a skew. I'm sure
Yeah,
Russia has a very different opinion.
Yeah, they're getting
It's just-
Ukrainian-controlled area polling data.
So one of my
there's other power plays here. I just
yes,
want
one of my
to
problems
caution
is-
it being so
Okay.
certain about something that I don't think we can be certain about.
Okay, so I had this discussion with someone yesterday, and I actually wasn't that confident about the polling until today. So, but I just assumed, like, okay, so we've got a similar situation in Scotland. There's lots of polling suggesting, not similar. There's a lot of polling suggesting that independence is now, like, basically above 50%, or it hovers around that. But we're not being allowed a referendum by the United Kingdom government. And one of the points of Scottish independence is we'd like to be, like, a bit more, like, economically Nordic, you know, and I still wouldn't think that would justify anything like Norway supporting secessionist groups in Scotland for Scottish independence, even though we're not being granted a referendum. I don't think, even if you could say there was 60, 70% secession favorability, then I don't think that justifies what Russia's doing. That's one. Two, I'm
we're
also
not talking
suspicious of the Russian side of the data, because the pro-Russia side doesn't even mention polling, as far as I know. They just say Russian-speaking population, or ethnic Russians, which to me suggests they're trying to use ethnic Russians as their way to imply that it's got popular support when it doesn't.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I don't know why we're talking about Scotland when we're talking about Ukraine. I mean, maybe it's a fair analogy. I don't know that it is, especially when we look at the political differences and, like, you know, some of the things that might be happening, you know, like if you have I don't think England's dropping any bombs in Scotland either, right? Like there's a little bit more nuance to that. But yeah, no, I was just curious if you had, like, really strong evidence for that, or if you were just, like, kind of like going with a best guess, and it sounds like it's a best guess, and I just wanted to point out maybe we should be careful about that.
I don't know if, like, Pew Research is going to be a best guess. It's like, okay, you could say it is the best guess. I definitely prefer it to, like, as far as propaganda goes, right? I think Russia's probably, like, the worst offender here, right?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian propaganda is pretty strong as well. But yeah, no. So we're not really sure whether or not a majority of people want their independence there. But
well, these polls aren't coming from. These polls aren't coming from. Sorry,
independence in general.
Yeah, I mean, like, these polls aren't coming from Ukrainian state media, you know, they're coming from around the world. Whereas Russia is like, okay, so far, okay, I'm just going to use this example. I know it's cheap, but Russian state media is the only side of the media that has been using video game footage in their reporting. Okay.
To be fair, I mean, a lot of the Ukrainian stuff comes straight out of Arma 3. Hassan was even duped by it, which I thought was hilarious.
But that's Twitter, okay? That's not Ukrainian state media, okay? Twitter is not the other side's equivalent to Russian state media, okay? You'd have to show the New York Times doing something like that, or, like, the BBC, which we don't have, okay?
So, to this point,
Dylan, are you Dylan Dawson right now?
What was that?
Are you Dylan Dawson me right now?
Dylan, hey, look, I'm always moving and shaking. As long as you,
right,
but maybe if you get a little bit more pro-Ukraine, you know, your internet.
I see how it is. I see how it is. The ghost of Kiev strikes again.
The shill of Kiev. The shill of Kiev. Thank you. Sprout, Stardust, and Tiberius in that order. So Sprout. Okay.
So Mythic, you are against the sanctions because you think that the sanctions are going to bring Russia closer to China, correct?
I think that might be a unintended consequence of it.
Okay, so I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but Russia's already declined. I mean, China's already declined Russia on war efforts. The only thing that I'm tracking, unless you have more information than I do, is that China has accepted Russia into SIPs. Now, if you look at SIPs has 76 direct partners. 75 of those direct partners are in mainland China. One of those direct partners is in Hong Kong. They have 1,100 and some odd indirect partners, which means they're not forced to participate in SIPs. So the countries that have applied sanctions on SWIFT probably aren't going to accept SIPs from Russia. So we have basically securely locked Russia in financially to just Russia, China, and Hong Kong because they cannot go through SWIFT. That's a
Okay.
pretty harsh economic sanction that is going to deter war efforts because war is already expensive, and now they can't trade, they can't pay back debt because they can't use SWIFT. It's going to be, or at least it's going to be more expensive to pay back debt.
So you're
Now
saying that
they're
you're
put
saying
in a
that
very rough position financially, to where it's going to make it very financially difficult to go into a war.
Yeah, I think that they anticipated this. I think they're going to fight with the equipment that they have. I don't think that they necessarily need explicit financing, especially when they already have the modalities to just conscript the fighters that they need, who they're severely underpaid already. They already have all their shitty artillery and munitions. They already have all that stuff. And it seems like they're ready to do a long, protracted thing in Ukraine. But I'm curious what you're saying there, because you said that, if I'm hearing you correctly, that you say that China initially declined to give them armaments or something. I forget. And honestly, I've not kept abreast of this very much. So please forgive me my very shallow understanding of this. But basically that China declined to give them aid, and yet you say that they have a payment modality that locks them into China. I think that wouldn't that precipitate more it wouldn't ameliorate them doing more business with China if China and Hong Kong and that area of the world is the only place they can take payments from?
China declined Russia in war efforts. They right now it's obvious, or at least from the moves they're making, that China does not want to get into a war. So they declined Russia war efforts. What they have accepted Russia in is SIPs, and that's the only thing that, as far as I'm tracking, that China has accepted Russia in is SIPs, because Russia got kicked out of SWIFT.
Right.
It's also not to mention that, like you say, they have their munitions and they have their equipment and all that. What they probably might not have is the economic capability to mobilize all of that. And that's like that's kind of where the sanctions are coming in, I think, especially since one of the expected outcomes at this point could be that they end up with a very Afghanistan style long haul where they're just in there, but the Ukrainians are constantly getting armed and supported by the rest of the world. So yeah, I wouldn't say that them having loads of tanks just sitting there is necessarily prep,
Real quick, Box, are you using information from the 2015 Pew research?
Let me see.
Because the one
this
that
was
I
in 2014.
Okay,
no,
so
not Pew. Wait, hang on. Pew was
you said Pew.
25th to 23rd of April. Where was that? Let's see.
Okay, because the 2015 data is a little bit of an issue because they asked all Ukrainians, and because of conflict, they didn't ask anybody in the Luhansk, Donetsk, or Crimea regions. So they specifically asked people whether or not Ukraine and the Donbass region should be separate, whether or not they should remain part of Ukraine but have greater autonomy, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't ask any of the areas that were the people that actually may or may not want to leave.
Wait, the one that said they asked Eastern Ukrainians. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Who the fuck did that?
How is that? Is that
Sparky,
CTV about to come in?
That was Sparky.
Okay.
I saw Sparky.
No, I'm just curious, if you had a different data set.
Oh yeah, the other one is from the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. I can link you that one if you want as well. I thought
Yeah,
the
I'll
Pew
check
one
it
was
out
just
after.
Eastern Ukraine, which is that's where the ethnic Russians are, right? Hang on, I'll
Yeah,
drop
the
it in the thing.
Donetsk and Luhansk are part of Eastern Ukraine.
Okay, so we are actually going over the amount of time we have allotted for this topic, and there's still two people that need to talk, and that's Tiberius and Stardust. So I'm going to throw it to them back first to Stardust and then Tiberius, and then we're going to just wrap up because we need to move on to the other topics. Stardust?
Yeah. So earlier, what was mentioned is that Ukraine has a whole bunch of graphite, apparently. Well, China has 80% of the world's graphite. And then Brazil and Germany are trailing right behind. Another thing that was brought up was Russia being an exporter of titanium and being threatened by Ukraine's supplies of titanium, even if Russia is a big exporter of titanium, there's still a small percentage of the global supply. Even if Russia is threatened by Ukraine, them contributing to that market is not a justification for Russia to be invading a sovereign country, basically. And then I would say economic sanctions are the closest thing that we have to diplomacy in this situation. It's basically the last thing that they can do, stopping short of actually putting troops in the area. And I just don't understand where this justification is coming from, that, oh, Ukraine is an economic threat to Russia, so that's why they're invading, and that's totally okay.
No one said it was okay.
Well, I mean, I don't know what your point was then.
It's just a viable reason to actually risk people and equipment.
It's not.
Just
though.
because
it's
you
not.
don't accept it, because you just go back to talking about your father's junk
Okay,
or something.
all right, mashed potato brain, mashed potato person, okay?
Okay, I'm gonna throw it over to Tiberius.
To hit what Mythic was kind of hitting on. So did the Russians plan for this? There's no way in hell they didn't. The question is it going to go to the Russian plan? From everything that we're seeing so far, it looks like they miscalculated. Not only in their military efforts just to enter the country, but also in the economic blowback that was going to come after them. Why that is, that's up in the air. I don't really want to go to there, but I think there's only really three options here. Either one, we're in a new Cold War where both sides kind of stabilize down and we lock down, and we're going to watch the Russians slowly take over Ukraine over the next 3 months. If it is not that, then you're probably seeing one side basically have to capitulate. Either the Russian economy grinds to a standstill to the point where it's 1991 all over again, or NATO becomes politically unstable because they have to deal with a migrant train that just rolled into the country or through major European countries. 5 million refugees, which is possible. We're not there yet, Star, but we definitely is possible. That's a lot of people that you have to house, clothe, and feed who are not generating economic activity. That is a massive burden for all of the Eurozone to deal with, not only just Poland or Germany or wherever the hell they go.
The sanctions have been some of the most far-reaching, effective sanctions I've ever seen, and that a lot of people have ever seen. A lot of experts have weighed in that, maybe there's a little bit more that we can do, but as far as the sanctions have gone so far, they've gone so much farther than we've ever seen before. The ruble has tanked. China initially was kind of turning the other way as Russia did what they wanted, but even now Russia has reached out to China for help in I believe it was they needed airplane parts, and China turned them down. China has even kind of taken like a both sides stance on this. So and then I guess the last thing I would say is that if you're so concerned about the Russian people, which, very fair thing to be concerned about, I'm concerned about them too, as soon as they withdraw from Ukraine, and it is built into the sanctions, as soon as they withdraw, the sanctions are lifted. So that's all they need to do. I don't want to hear about all this bullshit about titanium, graphite, whatever the fuck, my dad's dick, okay? I don't need to hear about it. We're talking about the sanctions. We're talking about Ukraine, and there's no reason for Russia to be invading a sovereign country.